So I'm happy to introduce Carlo Cellucci. I just finished reviewing his book, Rethinking Logic for Philosophia Mathematica. And in the first paragraph, there is this information. In 4 books, published with the distinguished Roman press La Terza, he offers his alternative to the project of modern logic, Le Ragioni della Logica, 1998, his alternative to mid-20th century philosophy of mathematics, Philosophia e Matematica, 2002, a detailed critique of most of the major schools of the latter, La Filosofia della Matematica del Novecento, 2007, and an account of his version of naturalized epistemology, Perché ancora la filosofia, 2008. And now we have a presentation of the full range of his ideas in English, Rethinking Logic, which those of us who have tried as well as we could to read his works in Italian, but who happen to be Anglophone, are very happy to have as well. So,
in a sense, my presentation will be a survey, but surveys may be boring when they try to be objective, so my survey will be very subjective one. With regard to science, one may speak, in my view, of models in different senses. The 2 main ones are models of science and models in science. A model of science is a representation of how scientists build their theories. A model in science is a representation of empirical objects, phenomena, or processes. In this presentation, I will briefly describe and compare 5 models of science: the analytic synthetic model, the deductive model, the abstract deductive model, the semantic model, the analytic model. Then I will briefly discuss to what extent each of these models of science is capable of accounting for models in science. First, the analytic synthetic model. The analytic synthetic model of science is due to Aristotle. Aristotle writes, "The process of knowledge proceeds from what is more knowable and clearer to us to what is clearer and more knowable by nature." Now, what is more knowable and clearer to us is the conclusion we want to establish. What is clearer and more knowable by nature are the prime premises or principles. Thus, according to Aristotle, the process of knowledge proceeds from conclusion we want to establish to the prime premises, its upward process. Starting from the conclusion we want to establish, Aristotle writes, we must find the necessary premises through which the syllogism come about, the deductions come about. We will find them either by syllogism or by induction. Here, by syllogism, Aristotle means by the procedure for finding the premises of syllogism, given the conclusion, which Aristotle describes in chapters 27-32 of the first book of the Prior Analytics. These chapters are really a treatise of, are really a logical discovery. Aristotle says that when the premises are found by these 2 methods, we should not put this forward right away, but rather should stand off as far as above them as possible. Namely, we should find other premises from which the previous premises can be deduced, and so on, until we arrive at premises which are prime premises. The prime premises are principles. Being principles, they must be indemonstrable and true. Moreover, they must implicitly contain all about the kind with which they are concerned. When we arrive at prime premises, the upward process terminates. This is analysis. At this point, Aristotle says, we try to invert the process from upward to downward, deducing the conclusion we want to establish from the prime premises, thus producing a demonstration of it and hence scientific knowledge. For, Aristotle says, to know scientifically is to know through demonstration. This is synthesis. This diagram shows the double process, analysis and synthesis. In addition to being true, according to Aristotle, the prime premises must be known to be true. Otherwise, we could not say that we have scientific knowledge of what follows from them absolutely and probably. Then the question arises, how the prime premises become known to be true? Now, the prime premises cannot be known to be true by demonstration. Otherwise, they would be demonstrable. But the prime premises, being principles, are indemonstrable. The prime premises, according to Aristotle, can become known to be true only by intuition. Then, like Aristotle writes, it will be intuition that apprehends the principles. Thus, intuition plays an essential role in Aristotle's analytic synthetic method. It is the way we apprehend the principles. However, the prime premises are not discovered by intuition. They are discovered either by Aristotle's procedure for finding the premises of a syllogism or by induction. What is the relation between the analytic synthetic method and modern science? According to a widespread opinion, as expressed for instance by Maurice Klein, modern science owes its origins and present flourishing state to a new scientific method, which was fashioned almost entirely by Galileo Galilei. This opinion, in my opinion, is completely unjustified. The initiators of modern science, from Galilei to Newton, did not fashion a new scientific method. On the contrary, they followed Aristotle's analytic synthetic model of science very faithfully. We can see, for instance, this from analyzing what Newton says. Newton writes, as in mathematics, so in natural philosophy, the inquiry of difficult things by the method of analysis ought ever to precede the method of synthesis or composition. Analysis consists in making experiments and observations and in drawing general conclusions from them by induction and admitting no objections against the conclusion, but such as are taken from experiments or other certain truths. By this way of inquiry, Newton continues, we proceed from effects to their causes, and from particular causes to more general causes, till the argument ends in the most general. This is the method of analysis. This is what Newton says. On the other hand, Newton goes on, synthesis consists in assuming the causes discovered by analysis and established as principles, and by them explaining the phenomena proceeding from them, and proving the explanations. Clearly, this is Aristotle's analytic synthetic method, except that Newton does not mention Aristotle's procedure for finding the premises of a syllogism, but only induction. The method just described is the method by which Newton proceeds in his own work. He explains that his own propositions were invented by analysis, but he didn't write down his discoveries in this way. He didn't write down his discoveries in the way he discovered them, really. He says, but considering that ancient mathematicians admitted nothing into geometry before it was demonstrated by composition, that is, by synthesis, Newton composed, that is, he wrote synthetically what he invented by analysis to make it geometrically authentic and fit for the public use to geometry as presented by Euclid. And Newton adds, Newton, could have written analytically what I found out analytically. But I was writing for scientists steeped in the elements of geometry, namely in Euclid's elements. Therefore, I wrote after the manner of the ancients, that is, synthetically, in a way completely different from the way he discovered them. He goes on saying, if any man who understands analysis will reduce the demonstrations of the proposition from their composition back into analysis, from synthesis back into analysis, he will see by what method of analysis they were invented. But this will require considerable skill, because synthesis tends to hide analysis. This, as Newton, makes it now difficult for a skillful man to see the analysis by which those propositions were found out. Thus, Newton makes it quite clear that in his research work he used analysis, but he also makes it quite clear that he presented his results hiding analysis and disclosing only synthesis, in order to conform to the model presentation of Euclid's elements. In the period from the 18th century to the end of the 19th century, the reference to Aristotle's procedure for finding hypotheses progressively disappears. This is due to the conviction that discovery is a process that escapes logical analysis and can be analyzed only psychologically. According to this opinion, discovery is a matter of intuition and cannot be portrayed by any rational procedure. A very significant representative of this attitude is Frege, who writes, the question how we have readily arrived at a given proposition, namely the question of discovery, may have to be answered differently for different persons. For it's not a logical question, it is only a subjective and psychological question. Discovery is not a matter of arriving at a thought through a logical process, but rather is a matter of grasping a thought, of conceiving a thought, laying hold of a thought, seizing a thought, understanding a thought. Now, conceiving, laying hold of, seizing, understanding are all intuition acts. Therefore, discovery is a matter of intuition. Not, of course, Kant's sensible intuition, but intellectual intuition, the one Descartes and Leibniz spoke about. Because of the conviction that discovery is a matter of intuition, in the period from the 18th century to the end of the 19th century, the analytic part of Aristotle's analytic model is dropped. Only the synthetic part, namely the deductive part, is retained. This leads to a new model of science, the deductive model. I will talk now about the deductive model briefly. According to the deductive model, formulating a scientific theory about a certain class of phenomena involves three operations. First, formulating hypotheses. Second, deducing consequences from them. Third, comparing consequences with the observation data. The hypotheses can be obtained only by intuition. They must be true and known to be true. This is the diagram of the deductive model. For example, UN writes, a physical theory is essentially a logical system. Perfectly rigorous deductions unite the hypothesis at the base of the theory to the consequences which are derived from it. Once the hypotheses have been found, it is a matter of obtaining numerous and varied consequences and of comparing them carefully with experimental laws. But, Julen adds, the physicist does not choose the hypothesis on which he will base a theory. it does not choose it any more than the flower chooses the grain of pollen which will fertilize it. The flower contents himself of keeping his corolla open to the breeze or to the insect, carrying the generative blast to the fruit. In like manner, Duhem continues, the physicist is limited to opening his thought through attention and reflection to the idea which is to take seed in him, without him. Only when the idea has taken seed in the physicist without him, deduction and comparison with experimental laws may take place. It is not up to the physicist, Duhem writes, to conceive a brand new idea, but it is very much up to him to develop this idea and to make it bear fruit, namely to deduce consequences from it. Not only the physicist does not choose the hypothesis on which he will base a theory, but according to Duhem, no rational reconstruction of the process by which a hypothesis takes seed in him is possible. Logic can only teach that the group of physical hypotheses constitutes a system of principles whose consequences ought to represent the collection of laws established by experimenters. Thus, according to the deductive model, only the deduction consequences from hypotheses and their comparison with experimental laws belong to the sphere of rationality. The formulation of hypotheses is confined to the sphere of irrationality. The same applies to the passage from a scientific theory to another one in the development of science, the process of theory change. According to the deductive model, a scientific theory has no rational connection with the preceding one. Thus, the deductive model provides no rational explanation not only for the formulation of hypotheses, but also for theory change. An obvious difference between the deductive model and the analytic synthetic model is this. While, according to the deductive model, the formulation of hypotheses is confined to the sphere of irrationality, according to analytic synthetic model, the formulation of hypotheses is a rational process. For hypotheses are obtained either by Aristotle's procedure for finding the premises of a syllogism or by induction. According to the deductive model, a scientific theory is a closed system. This means that the development of a theory remains completely internal to the theory. It involves no interaction between the theory and other theories. So a scientific theory is a self-sufficient totality. The hypotheses of the theory are given once for all, and developing the theory only means deducing logical consequences from them. What is logically deduced from the hypothesis is nothing essentially new. It only makes explicit what is implicitly contained in the hypothesis. The development of science consists in the construction of a sequence of closed systems which are not rationally connected with each other. Third model, the abstract deductive model. Certain developments in the 19th century led to a variant of the deductive model, the abstract deductive model. The abstract deductive model differs from the deductive model in that hypotheses are not obtained by intuition, but are chosen arbitrarily. They must not be true and known to be true, but only consistent, non-contradictory, and known to be consistent. The hypotheses are supposed to solve all problems in the relevant field. They can and must be tested comparing the consequences deduced from them with the observation data. This is the position of Carlo, for example. Carlo writes, formulating a scientific theory about a physical process is a matter of deducing the concrete sentence which describes the process from axioms consisting of more general laws. While the traditional deductive model of science requires axioms to be self-evident, that is, immediately clear to the intuition, we need not include this requirement. Arbitrary sentences may be selected as axioms. However, from an inconsistent set of axioms, we may deduce every sentence. which makes it trivial and useless for practical purposes. Then consistency is an obvious requisite. The axioms, then, must be tested by experience, namely, their consequences can and must be compared with experience. Thus, unlike the deductive model, the abstract deductive model trivializes the formulation of hypotheses, because hypotheses are chosen arbitrarily, so there is no matter of discovery. On the other hand, like the deductive model, the abstract deductive model provides no rational explanation for theory changed, for according to it, a scientific theory has no rational connection with the preceding one. Let me compare now this model of science with Gödel's incompleteness theory. The analytic synthetic, the deductive, and the abstract deductive models have a common limitation. They are all incompatible with Gödel's incompleteness theories. The analytic synthetic model and the deductive model are incompatible with Gödel's first incompleteness theorem because, by the latter, for any scientific theory for a given field satisfying certain minimal conditions, there is a sentence which is true but not deducible from the hypothesis of the theory. This affects the analytic synthetic and the deductive model, according to which all true sentences of a theory must be deducible from the hypothesis of the theory. On the other hand, the abstract deductive model is incompatible with Gödel's first incompleteness theorem because, by the latter, for any scientific theory for a given field satisfying certain minimal condition, there is a sense of the theory, a sentence A of the theory, such that neither A nor not A is deducible from the hypothesis of the theory. This affects the abstract deductive model, according to which the hypotheses are supposed to solve all problems in the relevant field. The analytic synthetic model and the deductive model are also incompatible with Gödel's second incompleteness theorem, because by the latter, for any scientific theory for a given field satisfying certain minimal conditions, it is impossible to prove by any reliable means that the hypotheses of the theory are true. This affects the analytic synthetic and the deductive model, according to which the hypothesis of a theory must be true and known to be true. The abstract deductive model, too, is incompatible with Gödel's second incompleteness theorem, because by the latter, for any scientific theory for a given field satisfying certain minimal conditions, it is impossible to prove by any reliable means that the hypotheses of the theory are consistent. This affects the abstract deductive model, according to which the hypothesis of a theory must be consistent and known to be consistent. Curry tried to argue that there is a certain way out of these limitations due to Gödel's incompleteness theorem. According to Curry, the analytic synthetic, the deductive, and the abstract deductive model may be retained if we assume that scientific knowledge for a given field is not represented by a single theory, but rather by a growing sequence of theories. Curry writes, Gödel's first incompleteness theorem only entails that the concept of intuitively valid proof cannot be exhausted by any single formalization. But scientific knowledge for a given field can be represented by a growing sequence of theories in which each theory properly includes the preceding one, in the sense that the hypothesis of a theory properly includes the hypothesis of the preceding one. However, Curry's way out is impossible because in Curry's growing sequence of theory, proof is not a fixed but a growing thing. Then, as Curry acknowledges, proof is precisely that sort of growing thing which the intuitionist had postulated for certain infinite sets. But this notion of proof is incompatible with the analytic synthetic, the deductive, and the abstract deductive models, according to which proof is not a growing thing, but must be a fixed thing. The semantic model, a very personal view. In the second half of the 20th century, the support for the abstract deductive model declined, and the model was gradually replaced by the semantic model. There are some slightly different versions of the semantic model. I will consider only von Frassen's version, as expressed in this first book. According to the semantic model, formulating a scientific theory about certain phenomena involves specifying a family of models. The concept of model is supposed to be the same in mathematics and the empirical sciences. A model is a structure consisting of a set along with a collection of operations and relations that are defined about it. A scientific theory is adequate if it has some model which is isomorphic to the phenomena that the theory is intended to theorize. This is what von Frassen writes. To present a theory is to specify a family of structures, is models. A model is a structure plus a function that interprets the sentences in that structure. If a theory is advocated, then the claim made is that these models can be used to represent the phenomena and to represent them accurately. We say that a model can be used to represent a given phenomenon accurately only if it has a substructure isomorphic to that phenomenon. The semantic models, in my opinion, have some serious shortcomings. A model is a structure, thus it's a mathematical object, while the phenomenon, of course, is not a mathematical object. Von Frassen writes, if the target, that's it, the phenomenon, is not a mathematical object, then we don't have a well-defined range for the function. So how can we speak of an embedding or isomorphism or homomorphism or whatever between the target and some mathematical object? Von Frassen's answer is this. We compare the model not with the phenomenon, but with the data model, that is our human representation of the phenomenon. The data model, von Frassen adds, is itself a mathematical structure. So there is indeed a matching of structures involved. And it is a matching of two mathematical structures, namely the theoretical model and the data model. Von Frassen's answer, however, in my opinion, is unsatisfactory because the data model is a mathematical object, while the phenomenon is not a mathematical object. This raises the question of the relation between the data model, human representation, and the phenomenon. Von Frassen's answer just pushes the problem back one step and does not solve it. In order to avoid this problem, von Frassen makes a very strong assumption. He writes, for us to claim A, the theory is adequate to the phenomena, and the claim B, the theory is adequate to the phenomenon as represented by our data model, humanly, are indeed the same. But von Frassen's assumption is a trick, it is unjustified, for we cannot mistake our contingent representation of the phenomena, the data model, for the phenomena themselves. Considering them the same is unwarranted. Moreover, even a fiction may have a model in the sense of a structure. Therefore, it's not models that can make a distinction between fictions and reality. Furthermore, the semantic model entails that scientific theories, being families of structure, are static things. But scientific theories undergo development, of course. The semantic model has no alternative than treating theory development as a progression of successive families of models. But then the question arises, how the transition from a theory to the next one in the progression comes about? The semantic model has nothing to say about this because it does not account for the process of theory formation, discovery, which is essential to explain the development of theories and the process of theory change. This is a structural limitation of the semantic model. The analytic model. According to analytic model, in order to solve a given problem, we start from the problem and look for some hypothesis capable of solving it. The hypothesis is obtained from the problem, and possibly other data already available, by some non-deductive rule, induction, analogy, metaphor, and so on. The hypothesis need not belong to the same field as the problem, may belong to any field, and in addition must be plausible, that is compatible with the present experience. But the hypothesis is in turn a problem that must be solved, and is solved in the same way. That is, we look for another hypothesis from which a solution to the problem posed by the previous hypothesis can be deduced. It is obtained from the latter problem, and possibly other data already available, by some non-deductive rule. It need not belong to the same field as the problem and must be plausible, and so on ad infinitum. This is the diagram representing the analytic problem model. Thus, unlike the analytic synthetic model, the analytic model assumes that analysis is not a finite process terminating with principle. It is a potentially infinite process which leads to more general hypotheses. Thus, it is an unending quest. Moreover, unlike the deductive model, the analytic model assumes that hypotheses are not formulated by a non-logical faculty such as intuition, but by logical procedures such as induction, analogy, metaphor, and so on. Thus, not only checking, but also formulating hypotheses is a rational process. In addition, according to analytic model, the passage from a scientific theory to another one in the development of science takes place through an analysis of the reasons why the hypotheses of a scientific theory are not in accordance with the observation data. On such basis, after this analysis, new hypotheses are formulated. Thus, unlike the deductive model, the analytic model establishes a rational connection between successive theories. According to analytic model, a scientific theory is not a closed system, it is an open system. This means that the theory is not a self-sufficient totality. The development of a theory involves interactions with other theories. The hypotheses of a theory are not given once for all, but can be replaced with new ones at any stage. Such replacement may take place either from within as a result of analyzing the problem to be solved, or from without as a result of interactions with other systems. A theory is not a self-sufficient totality because any system of hypotheses is inherently incomplete and must appeal to other systems to bridge its gaps. No system of hypotheses can solve all the problems of a given scientific field. Therefore, hypotheses are always bound to be replaced sooner or later with other more general ones obtained through interactions with other theories according to a potentially infinite process. The development of a scientific theory does not consist merely in deducing logical consequences from hypotheses, but especially in introducing a new hypothesis or modifying existing one by analysis. This does not involve the abandonment of the theory and the creation of a new one, but an evolution of the theory which preserves some of its characters while dropping others and acquiring new ones. The development of a scientific theory may also involve radical changes from which a new organization of the theory may arise. This may occur when the system receives new information from other systems in the form of new ideas or new results. Each new hypothesis establishes new relations with its system and other systems. In the last century, the analytic model has been generally neglected. Pavia has been one of the few people who has spoken about this and supported it. Pavia writes, scientific hypotheses are found by plausible reasoning. Contrary to deductive reasoning, which is safe, beyond controversy and final, plausible reasoning is hazardous, controversial, and provisional. But deductive reasoning is incapable of yielding essentially new knowledge about the world around us. Anything new that we learn about the world involves plausible reasoning. Plausible reasoning is the kind of reasoning on which the creative work will depend. To discover hypotheses, one has to combine observation and follow analogies. Thus, Pavia shares the basic idea of the analytic model that scientific hypotheses are obtained by logical procedures such as induction, analogy, metaphor, etc. However, Pavia limits somehow the scope of the analytic model because it reduces plausibility to probability. For it states that the calculus of plausibility obeys the same rules as the calculus of probabilities. This claim is unjustified because there are hypotheses which are plausible, but in terms of the classical concept of probability have zero probability. The same holds also another concept of probability. That in the last century the analytic model has been generally neglected doesn't mean, however, that it it's not been testedly or consciously used. An example is the solution of Fermat's problem. Show that there are no positive integers such that this equation holds for n greater than 2. This problem was solved by Ribet using the Taniyama-Shimura hypothesis. Every elliptic group of the rational numbers is modular. Indeed, Ribet showed conjecture of Taniyama-Shimura implies Fermat problem. But the Taniyama-Shimura hypothesis was in its turn a problem that had to be solved. It was solved by Wiles and Taylor using plausible hypotheses from various mathematics fields, and so on. This diagram represents the process of discovery of the solution of Fermat's problem. What is the relation between the analytic model and Gödel's incompleteness theorem? While the analytic synthetic, the deductive, and the abstract data models are incompatible with Gödel's incompleteness theorem, the latter supports the analytic model. For according to analytic model, no system of hypotheses can solve all the problems of a given scientific field. The hypotheses are bound to be replaced sooner or later with other model-logical ones, and general ones, since every system of hypotheses is incomplete and must appeal to other systems to bridge the gaps. Then, Gödel's first incompleteness theorem supports the analytic model. Moreover, according to the analytic model, the hypotheses for the solution to a problem are not definitive, true, and certain, but only provisional, plausible, and uncertain. Then, Gödel's second incompleteness theorem supports the analytic model. After considering 5 models of science, I will consider briefly models in science. As already mentioned, a model in science is a representation of empirical objects, phenomena, or processes. It is out of question that there is an optimal model in science. Digression. In the 17th century France, the minister Colbert charged the astronomer Gian Domenico Cassini to make an extremely detailed map of France. The map was the work of 4 different generations of the Cassini family. It took about 70 years. It was so detailed that each forest was designed tree by tree, each village was squared roof by roof. So one could have an impression of having every tree and every roof of the Kingdom of France under one side. This is a small detail of the map. This is a small detail of the map concerning the city of Paris at the time, right? So you see all the buildings, roofs, and so on, right? Now, perhaps the story of the Cassini map inspired a Lewis Carroll story. Lewis Carroll, in his Sapienza included, writes that, he speaks of this one of the characters who says that in my kingdom they had the grandest idea of all about map making, namely to make a map of the country on the scale of a mile to the mile. But the farmers objected. They said, no, this will cover the whole country and will shut out the sunlight so possible. So this character concludes, so now in my kingdom we use the country itself as its own map. And I assure you, it does near as well. Well, Carlo's story suggests that there cannot be an optimal model of science, because the optimal model of reality will be reality itself. But contrary to what the story's character says, using reality itself as its own model would not do nearly as well. For instance, Boltzmann writes, no theory can be objective, actually coinciding with nature, but each theory is only a mental picture of phenomena, so it does not coincide with nature. In science, there cannot be any optimal model, but optimal models suited to particular purposes. There are several kinds of models of this kind, such as physical models, scale models, analogical models, mathematical models, and so on, just to name a few. I will not discuss the various kinds of models in science, Rather, I will try to argue that not all models of science are equally capable of accounting for models in science. The Latin model of science is incapable of accounting for models in science because, according to it, scientific activity can be exclusively described in terms of deduction of logical consequences from hypotheses reached by intuition. Then, use of models in science is inessential and can be eliminated. In fact, Duane writes, at no time have continental physicists reduced the physical theory to be nothing but a collection of models. Models should not be taken as explanations of natural laws. A physical theory is not an explanation. A physical theory is rather a system of mathematical propositions deduced from a small number of principles which aim to represent as simply, as completely, and as exactly as possible a set of experimental laws. The explanatory part, which refers to models, has come to this fully formed organism and attached to it like a parasite. Models have no for Duane, models have no essential law, even heuristically. He writes, the substitution of models independent of one another for the rigorously linked deduction form of use does not give the physicist inquiries a suppleness and freedom which are eminently fruitful for discoveries. The model appears as an instrument of discovery, whereas in reality it has only been a means of exposition. This contrasts with the fact that models are one of the critical instruments of modern science. In particular, models are real instruments of discovery. The abstract deductive model of science also is incapable of accounting for models in science. For according to it, the scientific activity can be exclusively described in terms of deduction of logical consequences from arbitrarily chosen hypotheses, with the only requirement of consistency. Therefore, use of models is essential. It can be eliminated. For instance, Carlo writes, it is important to realize that the discovery of a model has no more than an aesthetic or didactic or at best a heuristic value. It is not at all essential for a successful application of the physical theory. Once again, this view contrasts with the fact that models are one of the critical instruments of modern science. Moreover, in the abstract deductive model, one must always be able to consider arbitrary models of hypotheses or axioms. In the case of axioms of geometry, Hilbert famously stated, instead of points, straight lines, and planes, one must always be able to say tables, chairs, and beer mats. This contrasts with the fact that in the actual practice of science, one does not consider arbitrary models of axioms, but only specific ones. In particular, for instance, the model in terms of tables, chairs, and beer mats is never considered. In practice, there are always reasons for considering a model of the axiom rather than another one. These reasons don't depend on the deductive model, but are external to it. Thus, the decision to consider a model of the axiom rather than another one cannot be justified in terms of the abstract deductive model. One would have thought that unlike the deductive model of the abstract deductive model, the semantic model would be capable of accounting for models in science. For according to it, formulating a scientific theory about certain phenomena means specifying effective models. But it's not so because, as already pointed out, the semantic model is unable to account for the relation between the model and the phenomena and for theory change. Indeed, the semantic model puts emphasis on the static aspects of physical system, namely their structure. But physical systems have both structural and behavioral properties. Behavior refers to state transitions and dynamic properties. Models should be able to express how and when changes occur to entities and relate with one another. Structures are unable to express that. The analytic model, on the contrary, is capable of accounting for models in science. According to it, solving the problem involves formulating hypotheses. Now, while many hypotheses in science are expressed using words, many other hypotheses are expressed using models other than words. Thus, models are not ancillary to doing science, but central to the solution of scientific problems. A model is the hypothesis that certain properties of the world can be represented in a certain way for certain purposes. While, according to the semantic model of science, models are structured, according to the analytic model of science, they can be a wide range of things, such as words, equations, diagrams, graphs, photographs, computer-generated images, dynamic entities, etc., etc. The question of isomorphism between model and reality does not arise, because a model is only the hypothesis that certain properties of the world can be represented in a certain way for certain purposes. Thus, the analytic model accounts for models in science. That, unlike the deductive, the abstract deductive, and the semantic models, the analytic model accounts for models in science, justifies the claim that not all models of science are equally capable of accounting for models in science. Science is a much more complex process than the deductive, the abstract deductive, and the semantic model suggest. To account for science, it is necessary to account for the processes of theory formation and theory change, discovery and passing from a theory to the next one. In his last book, Italo Calvino wrote, "Knowledge always proceeds via models, analogies, symbolic images, which help us to understand up to a certain point. Then these models, analogies, symbolic images are discarded, so we turn to other models, other analogies, other symbolic images, and so on. So the scientific process is a growing, infinitely extendable process. Only the analytic model, in my opinion, seems capable of accounting for this dynamic character of scientific knowledge." Thank you. Oh yes, yes. Giovanni.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this rich, very rich,
Too
and
rich.
too rich,
Too ambitious.
and intriguing talks. Of course, I mean, I've been thinking about this subject, for quite some time. So my question is very, very naive. Now, of course, I mean,
it would be easy for me to answer.
well, of course, I mean, it's difficult not to be in favor of plausible reasoning. Because after all, despite the fact that we teach, most of us, teaches first Topology, but, our, in everyday life, even when we lecture,
I hope so.
okay, I mean, plausible reasoning is the most we achieve.
But
It's okay. So you've been talking a lot about this plausible reasoning. Now, my question is, have you analyzed the language or the different languages in which we formulate this plausible reasoning? Because it seems to me that, theory change, theory formation has a lot to do with the choice of the different languages, and we know from the history of mathematics, how important that is. Because to move from one language to another, it means, to put into being new entities, okay? And also this will be, should be, so, because you didn't say anything about, about the choice of the language, with which you have to try to describe, the world around us. And I wonder if in your notion of plausible reasoning, of course, I mean, if this is included or you want to treat it separately,
Yeah, I didn't say anything because I was assuming that scientists express their theories in ordinary language, everyday language, of course. But in this language, they introduce new concepts, of course. The ordinary language is just a basis, but the language is extendable. Of course, the ordinary language is something growing. It's not the same, as 10,000 years ago. It's been evolved, It evolves by introducing new concepts and so on. So a language is not a fixed, like formal languages that's given once for all, but are something which is developing all the time with theories and everything. So, in this language, which is the basis of understanding each other, people add new concepts. Scientists add new concepts, and the language evolves. So from time to time, certain concepts are replaced by other ones, and the old concept disappears, and new concept takes place. This was more or less what I was.
So
I didn't say, but it
the
was.
language change was included.
Yeah, in this sense. So in the sense that any new theory changes the language, the ordinary language somehow, because it introduces new concept, new way of seeing the world, which changes, I mean, the outlook, I mean, everything changes everything. So,
Okay. That the comparison is different. Well, okay, but
I don't pretend to have convinced you, but anyway,
No,
I
I
explained my position, okay?
I accept that.
Perhaps you don't know that I know her when she was a student. We met at a conference in Santa Margherita. There was 18 privates. Mueller. There was,
the Polish one, Wojcicki. No.
yes, I think so, yes.
What?
Well.
Santa Margherita Ligure. There was a conference on the
Wait for
philosophy.
tomorrow.
You too were there. It was a century ago almost.
Thank you. I was not yet.
He too was a student.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were a student. Okay.
Carlo, you quoted both Duhem and even Pavia on the idea that deducing conclusions never adds to knowledge. I think this is a crazy idea. I wonder where it came from. I mean, just because something is logically non-applicative doesn't mean it's epistemically non-applicative. Otherwise, it makes mathematics into a sort of trivial. I mean, any idea where that idea originated? And it's very surprising that somebody like Pavia, either one of them, I mean, they're both mathematically very astute and must have run into many problems where, I mean, Grosholz theorems. I mean, they're far from obvious, aren't they? So, do you have any idea where that?
One in my opinion was right for this reason. If you have a set of hypotheses, you can generate mechanically all the consequences of this hypothesis. There is an algorithm for doing that. So you can exhaust all possible consequences. This is clear. I mean, it's machine will do it. So of course, in a sense, it is new, but it is new only in the sense that makes explicit what is implicit in the hypothesis. That's not really new. New means introducing new concepts, really. And in that case, you don't get to understand it.
Well, but it's certainly new to us. I mean, that's
Well, it's a
human knowledge that we're trying
Let me
to
say,
get.
I agree with you, it's psychologically new, but not logically new. Logically, there is nothing new. It's just psychologically new.
Epistemically, it's new. Thank you.
Emily. Yeah, I saw.
But she's a German.
But I saw the hands going up here.
You don't have the word for it.
She's still speaking with me.
Julie is very disappointed.
No, I ask you, no. I want, actually, that's a very important issue. And I think you have to discuss that issue in terms of concrete cases. So, for example, if you had arithmetic, you had a computer that could generate, let's say, all the truths of addition, right? That would not give you any of the really important 17th century results in number theory. It won't do that.
I agree, yes.
You have to add, for example, the notion of a polynomial. You will never get the notion of a polynomial out of a set of arithmetic truths.
Yeah, but because arithmetic is not what is deducible from the Anglo-Saxon. It's more richer than that, of course. Well, what Evolutionary.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. That is not what's deducible from piano.
Yeah, exactly. So it means that when you do
What I mean is, that's all that you can deduce from piano. Unless you want to magically attach set theory. Then you can point to set theory and go, oh, it's all in set theory. But it isn't. It's not all in set theory.
Look, analytic number theory is just using methods from analysis to deduce the arithmetic theory, right? The idea of Hilbert was that these analytic means can be eliminated. All experiments. Peter's hypothesis showed that it was like a wrong idea. This was the practice. The practice of mathematics was to use methods outside number theory. I mean, from analysis to solve arithmetical theory. This was the practice, right? And I said, well, yes, this is the practice, but theoretically, in principle, we can always derive this result from Peano's axioms. This was the idea, and Gibbon showed that was a wrong idea, that the practice was a necessary one. I mean, they had to use these analytic means, because it's generally impossible to eliminate non-arithmetic means in deriving, well, look at Weiss and Till. They have used things from elliptic, so, right, things that have nothing to do with numbers, of course. So mathematics is not pure, it's a mixture, it's an interaction between different theories. So, you know,
I have a question about your objection to the semantic. So your objection, your main objection, if I understand well, concerned the problem of the relation between models and reality. You objected to Van Frassen's solution to this problem by saying that, yes, one cannot simply say that there can be isomorphism or a kind of mathematical relation between the model and the data model. This is not a solution because the data model is not a phenomenon. It's not a phenomenon. But it seems to me that the problem is not whether the data model is the phenomenon, but whether it somehow represents the phenomenon. Because if the data model represents the phenomenon, then the model can have a relation to the phenomenon through the data model. And so, suppose now we want to there is a phenomenon of a change of temperature. This is also a dynamic process. And we represent that by drawing a curve of time and temperature. So we measure, and through measurement and mathematical representation of the result of the measurement, this curve, we have, I think, this could be considered a data model.
Yes.
Yes. So why? And this, in a sense, of course, certainly from a certain perspective, but it is plausible to say that this is an adequate representation of the phenomenon.
The question is, how do you measure? Because he assumes,
we measure
he says that our representation, data models, human representation of reality, is reality. They are the same. This is the assumption made, you know? You remember A and B, proposition A and B.
But it's not necessary to
No, this is the assumption, otherwise the solution is work. This is a quotation from not my view. He says, for us, the claim, the theory. The theory is adequate to the phenomena, and the claim, the theory is adequate to the phenomena as represented by her, are the same. You see, he's saying that the theory is identifying two things which are not same. It's a trick. How does he know that the theory represents reality? He doesn't know. Only to the data model, which is a human representation. So what does it?
May I just add?
One last question, and then we have to move on.
Like just a kind of follow-up. I think that one person is not actually saying that. He's trying to avoid what he defined as an offhand realist reply, the naive metaphysical realist commitment towards what is the content of the data model. So in order to say that, he basically says that the only thing we can achieve epistemologically is a data model of the phenomenon.
It's an idealistic assumption, as you say. What I know about reality is the reality. This is ideal, okay? But well, you have to prove it somehow. I'm not satisfied with this solution. It seems a trick.
Wouldn't be, wouldn't it be otherwise having something like the map, the paroxystic map you identified? I mean, if we have not a data model of the phenomenon, but we have something which is so close ontologically to the phenomenon, which picks up every single detail of the phenomenon.
You're right, but this is what I say, that our representation of reality is always incomplete. You remember what I said?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Whereas he assumes that it's complete, because our representation and reality is the same thing. You see, he's assuming the completeness, which I consider, unjustified.
I'm not sure he's assuming the completeness, but yeah, it's outside the context. I guess that it's slightly different what he's aiming at, but we can discuss it later. Thanks.
Okay.
No, I mean the discussion is like 18 minutes, so there are questions.
4 minutes.
More. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
If you
Maybe.
James?
Yeah.
I thought what you said was convincing about Newton, but I didn't think it generalised to other cases.
Sorry, I was not fully...
Sorry, I thought what you said was convincing about Newton, but I thought that was a special case. So it's plausible to say he looked at elliptical orbits that Kepler had provided for him and saw by analysis that an inverse square law was required. But what about Copernicus's work? It's hard to see the transposition of the sun being at the centre of the solar system to the Earth being at the centre being anything to do with analysis. Or, I just think more generally about scientific discovery like circulation of the blood or Darwin's natural selection. This seems to be very much synthetic, not analytic.
Maybe, but I'm just trying to compare all his writings on method. And in every text on method, he always says that discovery is by analysis and exposition is by synthesis. This everywhere. He writes the same thing in the optics, in his unpublished.
Newton, yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm just trusting what he says. I don't know whether it's true, but I'm trusting his words.
Sure, but I thought it was convincing for Newton.
Convincing?
I believe it in the case of Newton. To some,
In other cases,
to some extent.
Yeah.
But I don't think it generalises to these other
Maybe I
cases.
was referring to Morris Klein's statement that Galileo and Newton, I was just considering that, that's all. You remember, I quoted him, that's all.
Okay.
I'm not saying that every scientist thinks like that, of course not. I'm just saying that Newton and Galileo did not introduce a new method. They introduced something really new with respect to Aristotle. Aristotle taught that science is about the essence of reality, whereas Galileo writes it's not about essence. If we assume it's about essence, science cannot do anything. He makes the example of the clouds, for instance, the essence of clouds. And if I want to analyze that, I will never anything. So he says, I have to give up this details of essence. I must content myself with knowing phenomena. And what kind of phenomena? Mathematical ones. He describes the position of a body, movement, and so on. He makes a list of things which are, and so he says that in this way, science may advance.
But even in the case of Newton, now I'm thinking about it, now I'm thinking I'm not convinced. Even in the case of Newton, is it clear that, you end up with a concept of inertial mass and force. They seem to be new concepts. They don't seem to be just analysis of more existing ways of thinking.
Yes, but it's analysis of previous concepts. So it's clarification somehow, it's a change. I mean, analyzing means changing somehow the concept.
I have to think more about it. Thank you.
I will just refer to the fact that Einstein has got reason about reality. And he says that I'm not realist at all, because I know that my theories are different from reality. So it is quite clear about this. I mean, many scientists, Hertz, Boltzmann, Einstein, the most important scientists have always made it clear that theories are not reality, are different things. And assuming that they are identical, they always nonsense.
So we have a suggestion, which is let's take a 5-minute break, okay?
Yeah.
And then we'll come back for the last paper lunch.